Okay.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. We will just wait a few minutes to give people time to join, and we'll start the webinar soon. So I see that many people are connected now, so I think we can start. So good afternoon or good morning, everyone, depending on where you're located. And thanks for coming to this webinar on blockchain in the energy field. I'm Pauline Henriot. I'm a policy analyst at the IEA Energy Efficiency Division, where I lead the analytical work on digitalization. I'm stepping up for Vida Roside for those who have seen the program and wonder why the name is not the same. She was presented at last minute to present, but I hope I will be able to do her job correctly. I'll start by thanking you all for joining this webinar. It takes place in the context of a series that looks at how digital can improve energy efficiency, at how energy efficiency can help improve digital, and also at how digital can contribute to system-wide efficiency. By system-wide efficiency, I mean the ability to shift consumption to time of renewable production and to minimize the use of thermal power plants. This is, of course, a topic that will be key in achieving the energy transition. This series of webinars is organized by the Trident Project, which is a project through which the IEA seeks to provide policymakers with actionable policy guidance on how to digitalize their energy system and harness the potential of distributed energy resources like solar PV on demand response to accelerate the energy transition through the decentralization of the power system. And of course, when discussing digitalization and decentralization of the energy system, it naturally leads us to blockchain. It's a word that is very often heard when discussing this topic, and very often we hear blockchain presented as a powerful tool to help decentralization in association, for instance, with local energy communities, peer-to-peer, renewable trading schemes, and so on. But it also raises questions. I would say on my side, two questions. First, what exactly are blockchain specificity? Where can it bring the most of its values? And second, the question of energy consumption. Blockchain mechanism requires vast computing power and result in substantial electricity consumption. So to help us having a clearer view on this question, I'm very glad that we have today Vlad Koroama to present us his work. For 2 decades now, he has done research around the relation between digitalization and sustainability, in particular environmental sustainability. He contributed to the understanding of the environmental impact of ICT in general and the internet in particular. And today, his main research lies in exploring whether and how digitalization can lead to society-wide dematerialization and resource efficiency. He will give us an overview of this topic and then answer your question in a Q&A session moderated by my colleague George Camilla, who is a digital and energy analyst at the agency. But before I give the floor to Roland, before I will give the floor to Roland Brüninger. He is the foreign delegate to Switzerland, and he's also from the Swiss Federal Office for Energy. The Swiss Federal Office for Energy commissioned the report on this topic of blockchain, and it's a report to which Vlad contributed, and from which this webinar and its key findings stem. So Roland, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Pauline, and also a hearty welcome from my side. It's my pleasure to very shortly introduce EDNA and their overarching situation. If you go to the next slide, you see there how EDNA is positioned in the international organization. So EDNA is the Electronic Device and Network Annex, and this is an annex part of the TCP for E. For E stands for energy efficient end use equipment. And ETNA is actually focused, as you see, on technical and policy guides related to the efficiency of connected devices and the systems in which these devices are operating. You see on the bottom on the left side, a lot of countries have joined ETNA. It's about 14 countries who are participating in these ETNA activities. If you see the next slide, you see the balance of one side energy savings and on the other side also energy costs, as we mentioned it. The digitalizations, of course, with the devices you can enable energy savings through intelligent efficiency and, for example, also demand flexibility. But on the other side, it also costs, these devices also costs energy. And this is mainly also associated with the devices and also with the fact that they are very often networked and therefore have standby, and the whole upstream also uses a lot of energy. ETNA has during his life delivered more than 30 policy-related studies and reports in this area. So we are very active and we are investigating in a lot of different areas. The next slide shows you now where we are heading to. In ETNA, we are working on data centers, and there the work is still not finished. And with that, we also have an interest in the blockchain because those are created mainly in data centers. In parallel, Switzerland has, as an active ETNA member, commissioned as a Swiss activity an in-depth report on blockchain energy consumption. And I brought that to the platform of ETNA, and ETNA summarized this in a 2-page fact sheet, we call that, or policy brief, where the content is summarized. If you want to have more information or also the whole the both of the studies, if you see the next slide, there is the contact if you have questions to me, and there is also the web link where you can download the policy briefs as well the Swiss publications of the report, which is available, of course, publicly. So that's a very short introduction, and it's my pleasure to hand over back to the moderator, and I'm looking forward to the presentation. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Roland. And now I will give the floor to Vlatko Rama to lead us toward the world of blockchain and how to use it to the best of energy efficiency.
Thank you, Roland, and thank you, Pauline, for the very kind introduction. Thanks also to the IEA for organizing this webinar and for inviting me. So, does this work? Yeah. So the energy consumption of blockchains is a wide topic of concern in the media, among companies. Well known how Tesla stopped last year to accept Bitcoins, and also in non-governmental or governmental organizations. And while everyone agrees that the energy use is growing rapidly and is a source of concern, there is quite a variation among the existing estimates. Here from a paper from last year, a picture where you can see that in 2018 we had like the power of 2 gigawatts up to 20 gigawatts, so a factor of 10, and even more coming to today. So it is growing, but how much is it exactly? So the research questions that this study is based on were fourfold. What are the main drivers of blockchain energy consumption? What are likely consumption figures for today? Are there any existing limiting factors, and how do they act? And can we devise on top of that effective countermeasures to diminish the energy consumption? And the talk now will have 3 parts. And all these questions will be addressed in the second and third part. The first part is a technological background that is needed to understand those questions a bit more profoundly than just on a very superficial level. So technological background, why blockchains, a brief history, what are the components, and particular focus on the consensus mechanism. So long before blockchain, in the 1990s already, we had first digital currencies, DigiCash, eCash by David Chaum, and so on. And the problem they all face is that digital data is trivially multiplied, stored, and transmitted. So any coin that you owe, you can trivially multiply and spend several times, which is known as multiple spending problem. And this, of course, needs to be addressed. And the ones of you who might be computer scientists or know the concept of public infrastructures might say, hey, let's do a public-private key pair, you know, and we have a central trusted authority, and this TA signs all coins, and by this their authenticity can be assessed. But this is only of the original coin. Nothing prevents copying this signed coin and spending it multiple times. So this does not address the topic. So any these early digital currencies, in those what the TA did, not only signed the coins, but kept a ledger of which account holds each coin exactly and has the right to spend it exactly one time. So just to give an example from the 90s, as you can see, the slide is also in a very 90s style. If you have this eCash bank and a client buys something from a merchant and sends some coins to the merchant has first to validate with the bank, are these coins really, are they spent for the first time? Does this client, you know, and the bank validates this, and then the merchant and also changes the ledger. Now these coins are with the merchant, right? So we no longer are interested in those, but learn from this that the general problem of digital currencies is that they need a unanimously trusted ledger that certifies the ownership of coins and can track the changes of this ownership. And a centralized TA, such as in those early models, has a couple of drawbacks. One of them is the system safety relies on the safety of the trusted authority, which is usually proprietary. So security through obscurity, which is usually not a good idea. And it also has a questionable scalability. It can easily become a bottleneck. So Bitcoin has been devised, and I know the irony is very strong here, originally as something very good for small casual transactions. Okay, so we come to Bitcoin. Bitcoin introduced for the first time in 2008 the idea of a distributed ledger that holds all these transactions and the proof of ownership. It knows coins that are Bitcoin, BTCs, right? Accounts that hold these coins, and transactions. Transactions can be either minting new coins or performing a transfer between accounts. But the accounts do not own the coins, as in I have, you know, this sequence of bits on my hard disk, and this represents somehow a signed coin or whatever. No, all the coins are on this public distributed ledger that knows all existing account numbers, not necessarily their owners, but the numbers, the ownership and the ownership of Bitcoins and all transactions ever performed. What I do have on my hard disk, and I should better have, is a private key that shows to the world I am the rightful owner of this account. But the account itself is on the blockchain. So the only thing I have with me physically, so to say, is the private key. And this ledger is distributed. There are a large number of nodes that hold this ledger, and anyone can become such a node. It's a free, no access restriction system. For the more technically inclined, this can also be seen as a virtual machine where the state is a snapshot of associations between accounts and coins, and any Bitcoin transaction represents a state transition of this machine. And as it is now in Bitcoin and similar in other cryptocurrencies, every couple of minutes, 10 minutes in Bitcoin, a collection of transactions is recorded. They represent a state transition, and this new block of transaction is added to the blockchain, hence also the name blockchain, but we'll get to this a bit later again. This, though, brings new solutions, issues. One of them is you need a consensus mechanism. When you have a central TA, the TA decides, right, these are the valid transactions. Now, if you have thousands of nodes that somehow need to agree, these are the new valid transactions of this last period. And this is not a new problem in computer science. It has been conceptualized in the 80s already by Leslie Lamport as a Byzantine generals problem, where you have, such as here, you have several generals that need to attack a city, and it only succeeds if they attack it at the same time. But there is no like upper general, no admiral, if you want, that can, you know, decide for everyone. They need somehow to communicate and to decide So what protocol do you use, especially as messengers here can get lost, can get killed or kidnapped by the enemy, or some of the generals might be unavailable and so on. And there are there is a large literature in distributed systems of computer science on this, but all of them, or most of them, assume that it is benevolent generals. They want to work together. And now in this entirely open system where it's about money, of course, we need a solution that works for malevolent nodes, and especially for what is called Sybil attack, which is the attacker creates many copies of itself, and all these copies put forward the same solution. Like all of them say, hey, all these, the valid transactions of the last period are sent the money to this guy, to me, let's say, right? Was the one. And then if I create a majority, I can steal all those money, right? So it's relatively easy to manipulate because digital data are almost for free, right? And that's why in an open system without access restriction, the participation in the consensus mechanism cannot be free. The vote needs to be bound to a limited resource, and this is where the proof of work came in. And I will get to the next slide to proof of work, but before that, a short digression, one-way functions and a subset of them, hashing functions. The difference is not relevant now. These are functions, as in this nice analogy here, that in one way are very easily computed. And in the opposite way, once you have the smoothie here, it's almost impossible to get back to the original. So more mathematically, the function f is relatively easy or trivial to compute, but f minus 1 is not feasible with today's computers in a feasible amount of time. Additionally, also, it spreads the results. So if I get almost to the result, this doesn't tell me anything about how I can really get to the result. You know, being close enough doesn't help me. So what if I didn't find the correct x to come at a precise y, then I need just to try some random other x. And this is known as brute force in computer science, and that's why this is a good proof of work mechanism. So how does Bitcoin deploy this? You have a block of transactions, again, that are the new transactions of this period, a time span, some more data, and then what is called a nonce. A nonce is a random sequence of bits, and they are put through this one-way function, and as a result, you have a result here that is 256 bits represented by 64 hexadecimal characters. And the aim of the puzzle is to find the result in a specific form, which is having a precise number of leading zeros, right? And the likelihood to find this is 1 divided by 16 to the power of n, because the likelihood to find 1 0 among 16 possible results is 1 divided by 16. For this 0, it's again 1 divided by 16 and the 2 multiply, right? And so on. Or seeing the other ways around, you need 16 to the power of n, n being the number of leading zeros tries on average to find the result, right? And this is equivalent to 2 to the power of 4n. And currently in Bitcoin, we have 20 leading zeros. This means 2 to the power of 80, and that's over 1 septillion hashes that happens every 10 minutes or so. So you might get a sense from where that, you know, that huge energy consumption comes from. And the last step is so the cost of this hash function is they're fairly inexpensive, but they don't come for free. And 1 septillion of them, certainly not, right? So you need to incentivize participants to take part in the system. And there are 2 types of reward. The transaction fees. So whoever finds this block and the correct nonce gets the transaction fees for each of the transactions in the block, and also the block reward, which is newly minted Bitcoins. And there is an analogy. You look for the nonce and find and get the BTCs, as in digging and finding gold. So that's why these people or these systems are called miners. And again, each block has a hash to the previous block, and that's why it's called blockchain. So we're done with this technological part, but just recap. Step 1, to avoid multiple spending, a digital currency needs a trusted ledger. For scalability and open security, the ledger needs to be open and distributed. This means a consensus mechanism is needed. Open consensus mechanism means it is prone to Sybil attacks. To solve the Sybil attacks, a cost must be placed on participation in the consensus mechanism. And for Bitcoin, this cost is solving the cryptographic puzzle. That's why it's also called cryptocurrency. So these currencies, among the more general digital currencies, are called cryptocurrencies. And finally, to incentivize nodes, despite this cost to take part, you give them rewards, right? So while we will talk now about the energy consumption of this entire thing that truly became a problem, it is difficult not to understand what a thing of beauty this actually is. So it is Nakamoto, so the person of group of person who are anonymously known as Nakamoto, have really done a very beautiful thing, combining several concepts of computer science into this system. But by this, we go to the actual questions. And first, the Bitcoin energy consumption that happens in 3 places. In storing the virtual machine. Secondly, the communication among nodes, which can be at least threefold. The download of the entire blockchain by new persons who want to become nodes, transactions submitted, and messages. I will only talk about the third one. The second one, transactions, is negligible, so please just trust me. And the initial download is not negligible, but it is substantially less than the messages. So this is the more important part. And thirdly, the computation, and in particular, proof of work. So let's get cracking with the first 2, storage and communication, to then get to what actually interests us, the proof of work. But we need to analyze the other ones first as well. So storage energy, and there will be a bit of equations, but they look heavier than they are. Black is the equation, and blue is the unit of measurement put to help understanding. So the energy used for storage of a blockchain is basically the number of replicas that exist, that for Bitcoin are about 15,000 more or less today. The size of the blockchain, around 400 gigabytes today, because every node has the entire copy. And what is called the energy intensity of storing data. So the amount of energy per unit of data, say gigabyte, to store this data for 1 year. And while the first 2 are pretty clear, there is quite a range for, as you can see here, for the third one, because it can be stored in several ways, and the 2 extremes are maybe on PCs, laptops, desktops, or hyperscale data centers, which are meant for storing data and are, of course, much more efficient. And I'm not going through the detailed computation now. The range of result is from around 50 megawatt hours per year of energy to 4 gigawatt hours. Or in power, this is an average power over the entire year of 5 kilowatt versus half a megawatt. 5.5 kilowatt are like 3 kettles being continuously turned on in someone's home. So really nothing on a worldwide scale, right? And half a megawatt of average power is maybe a small to medium-sized onshore wind turbine of 2 megawatts that produces, 25% of the time at its capacity, electricity. So it's also like quite manageable, right? So that's the worst case. For communication, it's easier to look at the power. And to get to the power, I'm looking at the power, at the energy consumption for 1 block, so every 10 minutes, right? And dividing this energy for 1 block by the time means the average power for the block. And because blocks are one after the other, this also means the average power over all the time. So again, it looks more complicated than it is. It is the size of the block times, because each block, once it has been decided, needs to be sent to all the nodes so that they can append it to their blockchain, to their local copy, right? So the size of the block times the amount of replicas times the energy intensity of the internet, which is the wide area network plus the fixed access network. So this is the energy, and this again gets divided by time by the about 600 seconds of a period, and this leads to a communication power of about 10 kilowatt. or an energy of 90 megawatt hours per year. That's compared to the lower end of storage. So storage was already not very expensive. This is about the same, but on its lower end. This, by the way, in the study, if anyone will look, I while preparing this talk, I realized I made a mistake by 1 order of magnitude. So it looked like 1 order of magnitude, even less. Sorry for that, Swiss Federal Office of Energy. Good. So we come to the computational power for the proof of work mechanism. And here the principle I have been using is that of economic equilibrium, right? So if I am a miner, as long as the expected gain is higher than my cost for mining, then it is reasonable to keep mining or to, enthusiastically join the mining community. And we look at both the sides, costs and expected reward, and then we put them together. We bring them together. So the variable costs for each miner are, and now the energy intensity of hashing. So how many joules do I need for 1 hash? Times the PUE, that's a measure, power usage effectiveness comes from data centers, a measure for the overhead that is not computational, mainly cooling, right? So these together are the total energy per hash. And multiplying them by the price of electricity leads the price per hash, right? And then these are the number of hashes that I, as a miner, can perform in 1 period. So for 1 period, these are my costs, basically this product here. And some things cancel out there. Of course, hash is not a unit of measurement; it's just a number, but I put it for better understandability. And looking at this, we can further rewrite the first part here by splitting it in 2, the number of hashes per period, in the length of the period and the hash rate, how many hashes per second, because this is what usually the literature does. Okay, so these were the costs. Now, what is the expected revenue? The expected revenue is the likelihood for a miner to be successful times the total reward for successful mining. The reward is the number of BTCs awarded times the current price plus these transaction fees, right? So this together is the total reward that one miner will get. But what is the likelihood that I will get it? Well, I need to divide the hashes that I can do in 1 period by the total number of hashes. The total number we already know, 2 to the power of 4n, right? 2 to the power of 80 today for Bitcoin. And what I can do is, of course, my hash rate times the time. So times the time, the length of the period. So this is the likelihood, this entire fraction here, this entire fraction is the likelihood that I will be the one, winning. And now, making a system equilibrium, we put the 2 together. Some things cancel out there. So it can be simplified, and then we solve for the energy intensity of hashing. So this is the equilibrium or the threshold energy intensity for hashing. If I can keep below this energy intensity, then it is worth for me to keep mining. Otherwise, it's not worth it. And unsurprisingly, this is directly correlated to the reward. The higher the reward, the higher my energy intensity can also be, and inversely correlated to everything that makes mining more expensive, in particular the price of electricity, but especially the complexity of the cryptographic puzzle that is to be solved. And now we can use this intensity of hashing, and this is the last couple of 2 slides, I think, with equations, and then we're done with them. So I will use this that I have just computing in putting an upper bound for the worldwide energy needed during 1 period for mining. Why upper bound? Because if I'm above this threshold, then it's not worth for me to continue or to keep hashing, right? Only if I'm below it. That's why it's an upper bound. And then it's the number of total hashes done worldwide during that period times the PUE times the energy intensity of hashing. So it's quite trivial, actually, this equation. We know that this is 2 to the power of 4n, and then we take this and divide. So this is the energy for one period, dividing it again by the length of the period gives us the power, the average power. And the power is the same, not only for the period, but for the year, right? So we replaced this H there, and we divide it by T. And now taking the energy intensity, the equilibrium one, the threshold that we have just computed on the last slide, gives again a computation that looks more complicated than it is. This is the final result. So we have the reward up here divided by the price of electricity kilowatt hours per US dollars per kilowatt hour, sorry, and the time of a thing. And if we now put the current data for today, which is the reward is 6.25 Bitcoins, their price is about 40,000 US dollars. That yields some 250. For the transactions are the price of transactions, it's even more volatile, but currently it's around $1.5 to $2, and it's about 1,500 of them per block. So the 3,000. So transactions are much less, are basically negligible compared to the reward in terms of this. So we have about $250,000. And if we put this in here and solve everything, then we get to an average power of 30 gigawatts as a worst case scenario. And this means 30 nuclear power plants, right? So we're very far from the one sort of moderate sized wind turbine. So what does this mean? Worst case, 30 gigawatt or 260 terawatt hours of electricity per year. Just to put this in relation to some numbers that we can start something with, this means again 30 nuclear power plants. It's also the yearly electricity consumption no longer of the likes of Portugal or Argentina, but we are places 11 to 20 worldwide, right? Spain, Australia, UK, these sort of countries. Because I'm Romanian, it also corresponds to Romania or Portugal's sort of total energy consumption. So primary energy consumption, primary energy is 6 times as much as electricity. It also has all the fuel that is spent to move the cars, the gas to power industry, you know, to heat the homes and so on. So all the energy consumed in a country. It's about Bitcoin mining countries the size of Portugal or Romania. To look at IT, it is about the same size as the energy consumption of all non-crypto data centers in the world. There are varying numbers between 200 and 400 terawatt hours per year. There are also larger numbers out there, but those are overstated. I personally trust more this number. So Bitcoin itself is not yet there, especially as this is a worst case. But with all the other cryptocurrencies, we are about there where all data centers, so all YouTube, you know, Netflix, all company servers, everything, right? Bitcoin mining, crypto mining is about there. Or it's about 1% of the worldwide electricity usage, which the International Energy Agency tells us it's around 25,000 terawatt hours per year. And comparing this to related work has sometimes a similar sort of method, sometimes very different, like a bottom up, looking at how many you know, crypto hardware, specialized hardware for crypto mining has been sold, and making assumptions how much of that is online and so on. There are older studies that of course have smaller numbers, but current numbers from the Cambridge Bitcoin and Energy Consumption, Electricity Consumption Index, or Digiconomics. Digiconomics is a project by Alex de Vries, who is one of the very early researchers who published estimates of this energy consumption. You see that, so there are lower bounds expected and upper bounds in the literature, and the expected ones of today are relatively close to the upper bound. So it's not such a, like the upper bound is not something that, you know, it's tenfold what probably is. No, it's a factor of, you know, 1.52 or something. So what do we do about all of this? Well, first, just to compare these three, the energy, the worst case energy for storage on PCs is 5 orders of magnitude less than that of computation of proof of work, right? So here we are at a small wind turbine that goes from time to time. Here we're at 30 nuclear power plants. so this is right, and between best case storage and communication, we are 6-7 orders of magnitude, so a factor of 1 million, right? This is a logarithmic scale, of course. If you prefer a linear scale, that's how it looks on a on a linear scale, right? Somewhere down there you have one. If you prefer pie charts, that's the pie chart of it, right? So we really need to take care of the yellow part. That's what we should take care of. And the question: are there any mechanisms already out there that we can, take advantage of? Unfortunately, not. If we look back at this equation, at the final result, basically, it depends only on the mining reward and the price of electricity, right? So there is no sort of inherent economic mechanism that would counteract this. If Bitcoin price will be from 40,000 to 1 million, so it will grow 25-fold, then the electricity consumption will also grow 25-fold, unless networks break down. But the electricity grid breaks down, or very slowly the price of electricity in some parts most affected will slowly go up, and then there will be some counteracting here through the price, but that is slow as inertia and so on. And unfortunately, there is also no technological mechanism either, because as you see here, there is no, we did put the hash rate. The hash rate, at some point, we had it in our equations, and this is the technical sort of the efficiency of the hardware, right? How many hashes per second, and also per energy. Much more efficient they became over time. But all of this get eaten up. So very shortly, you have a competitive advantage by a more efficient hardware. You deploy it, then you go a bit below the worst case, but then in the long run, everyone joins you because they also start buying the newer hardware and they buy more and more of it. And that's a perfect example for what is called rebound effect, which is my main research interest, and I would love to speak a lot about it, but it's not the topic today, but it is a very good example for rebound effects. So what can we do? There are fortunately alternative consensus mechanisms. Best known among them is the proof of stake that gets rid of the concept of miners entirely. Instead, if I owe enough of the cryptocurrency of the blockchain, then I can be a validator. And validators are randomly chosen for each block. There is a random choice of validators among everyone. And then you validate the block. And this is quite good also against Sybil attacks, because if I want to have the majority in these randomly chosen guys from a large number and also a large number of choices, then I need to be basically at 50% of the stake, and that's a lot of money. So it's quite uncertain. And there are many cryptocurrencies that are already deployed this, and Ethereum, the second best known, is changing towards it now. And it's interesting to see predictions of how Ethereum will be once it's changed to proof of stake. You see here the estimates for its power instead of Bitcoin, and the two Bitcoin and Ethereum are about the same size, so it's a good comparison. Here we are at the 30 gigawatts, maybe 3 best case, but more likely towards the 30 gigawatts. And here we are at 1 megawatt to 30 megawatts, so a factor of 1,000. It will still be, because it implies many more messages, it will still be the dominating factor and more than the others that are 5 to 7 orders of magnitude less, but it will reduce it 1 order of magnitude, right? So we come back from nuclear power plants to wind turbines, a bit more of them, but still wind turbines. So the most efficient interventions are those discouraging or banning proof of work, basically, right? This is the one single most efficient thing we can do. Sometimes such efforts are done. The European Parliament just a month ago refused to ban proof of work because, of course, there are market considerations. I'm not a specialist. I don't think it's an easy thing to do, but that's what we should strive for. And the good news is not only governments can do this, but if you are a company, I mean, these are the effects of Elon Musk's decisions on the quotation of Bitcoin. We are not all Elon Musk, but if you are a bank, if you have a company, your decision whether you accept proof of work or others has a large influence of the world energy consumption of blockchains. And by the way, not only for cryptocurrencies, maybe we get in the discussion to also speak about what blockchain can be used for, because it's of course much more than just cryptocurrencies. And with that, oops, sorry. Yeah, with that, I am done and I am open for, thank you very much. Sorry for the 2 minutes more.
Thank you very much, Vlad. That was an excellent presentation and really, really clear explanation of all the drivers. I mean, I've kind of looked into this as well, but I found that to be very clear, and all the feedback we're getting so far in the chat has been very positive. So thanks for that. So we have a couple questions coming in. So maybe I'll just do this one quick clarification. Somebody has asked about the number of replicates, asking if this refers to the number of unique nodes or miners, that they had not heard about this term replicates. I don't recall which part of the presentation, if I don't know if you remember, but we can move on if depending on the response.
Is this a question to me?
Yeah, so yeah, somebody asked about the term you used of number of replicates.
I think nodes, yeah, number of replicas.
Okay.
It's basically copies of the blockchain, but I like to use the name replica because copy implies that there is one master copy. And here it's really just peers. There is no master copy. So on a language level, replica seems the better word, but probably harder. So think of it as blockchain copies, and these are the nodes. So it's the number of nodes that have blockchain copies of the entire blockchain. And these are, when I was writing the study in last summer, it was about 13,000 of them. Now I checked and it's about 15,000, it seems.
Great. Okay, so let's get into the meat of the question. So there's a couple questions asking about so if price or the value of Bitcoin is an important driver of overall energy consumption. Several interrelated questions, but one is if Bitcoin is valued at, for example, 2.5 million euros, then are we expecting 300 gigawatts as a kind of upper bound?
Yes. Clearly.
Okay.
Again, the only technological limit is the capacity of the power grid to cope. Other than this, it's the simplest economic sort of calculation by any miner. Yeah, okay. Of course, I ignored now the fixed cost of buying hardware and so on. So it is a bit idealized. That's why it's also an upper bound, because I didn't think this also, by the way, when thinking of the environmental effect, it's not only the use case, it's also the production of the mining hardware. I ignored that a second, and that brings it a bit down. But the sort of dominant costs over lifetime are indeed the electricity costs and not the hardware costs. So that brings it a bit down, but not a lot.
Yeah. And then so related to this, the electricity consumption, I think it was assumed, but 5 cents per kilowatt hour. What is the direction as electricity prices fall or increase in terms of overall energy consumption?
Well, as we're hosted by the International Energy Agency, I would love to give the question back.
Yeah, I mean, so I don't track electricity prices, but I mean, my understanding is a lot of miners are migrating to low-cost regions around the world, right? So even in China, before the ban, miners were flocking to the areas with either excess hydro or really cheap coal, and it seems the miners that have left China have moved to other regions with cheap electricity or off grid. So yeah, just I guess yeah. Yeah.
I think from what I've read, I think the 5 cents are a good estimate for the places where mining mainly happens.
Yeah, and I think that's the central assumption for the Cambridge. I think that's the central number that they use, and you can adjust that assumption. Okay. Maybe we can get into kind of alternatives to proof of work. So do you have any thoughts on, I've never heard of this term, but lattices, DAG. You covered it a bit in your presentation, but I guess the order of magnitude maybe of some of these other approaches, and whether, I mean, a question for me then, whether Bitcoin would ever move away from proof of work.
Well, I come at it from the energy side. My interests are in digitalization and energy consumption generally, or digitalization and sustainability actually generally. And most interested I am actually in the indirect effects. So how can digitalization help us save energy, but how can it also induce more energy consumption outside digitalization itself through rebound effects in self-driving cars and so on. But I'm also interested in the footprint of it, but I'm not a specialist in blockchains per se, right? I only approach them. So I'm not sure. From everything that I've read, it seems that it's not so simple. It seems that but take it with a grain of salt. Ethereum is doing it and it will succeed most likely. This year there's been talk for some years, but now it will really happen. For Bitcoin, it seems that the proof of work is very intimately connected with the blockchain itself, and that's why it would need a very broad consensus among everyone who holds, among all miners, that they change. And from the commentaries that I have read, but that I cannot really assess deeply, it seems unlikely at the moment.
Great. Yeah, maybe kind of related to that. Yeah, I guess, in terms of, I mean, this is getting beyond the scope of your study, but if you have any comments on alternative consensus mechanisms and how they might be used, or, proof of stake or proof of authority or faster validations in terms of the applications of blockchain in more sustainable energy systems. So I don't know if it's peer-to-peer trading or VPPs, or I don't know, validating REX. If you have any comments on applications in energy systems, or of any good references, but there was a
no, I'm very happy with the questions. Thank you. I actually even had 2 slides about applications of blockchain in the end, but I jumped over them because I was already going a bit above the time. I will actually, let me maybe go back to them. So benefits of blockchain, because I think that we always, when we think about the impact, what is it for? Is there a benefit, or what is the benefit? And I am not an economist, so I'm not entirely sure how, to which extent we can really think this as a benefit. Maybe it's also, bad luck for central banks that throw money, but those disappear in buying Bitcoins and other cryptocurrencies. But anyway, they are being used obviously as an investment, as a hedging against inflation. Historically have outperformed a lot, of course, the stock market and everything else. And not only the blockchains, Bitcoin does not allow smart contracts. I didn't get in the study, I speak about smart contracts quite at length. Now it wasn't the time for this. Smart contracts allow many things. And one of them, for example, is NFTs, the non-fungible tokens, right? That can be emitted on digital, but also on physical assets. For example, we have this Swiss bank that has a Picasso in its vault and put out 4,000 tokens on it. So you could invest by buying one in 4,000 pieces of the Picasso. And this is also being done for, classic cars and wine collections and what. So all sorts of classical inflation hedging, but that all of a sudden also you don't need to be a millionaire to take part in this. You can invest a couple of thousand and you are part of it. So this one big domain. And the other one, as you said, is energy markets. And yes, there is peer-to-peer, microgrids and so on. But what I like a lot is using smart contracts and decentralized finance in the energy market for development, for making or financing green energy projects in the developing world. And there is Paul Cuff here at the University College Dublin, who has done great work on this. There is a series of several papers. I just put one of them here, and where they show that how banks often fail in such markets because of the high risks, the high volatility, right, of risks. Or if they wouldn't fail, they would be prohibitively expensive. But through microfinancing, through smart contracts, because there you have the certainty in a smart contract that you get your money back. So the risk is much smaller, so you can take this risk because it's not actually a risk, right? So you can finance much more projects, and they have, so there is, I think, a lot of potential for smart, in my personal opinion, again, not being a specialist, I think that smart contracts are the true power of blockchains and not cryptocurrencies. That's good against inflation and you know what, but this is the real power. And by the way, a power that Bitcoin also doesn't have. Bitcoin doesn't allow smart contracts. So I'm not sure whether this answers a bit the question or not.
Thanks, Vlad. No, that was very, very helpful. We have about 3 minutes more for the question answer. I have a ton of questions to get through, but sorry, kind of two related questions. So how far are we at present from the equilibrium revenue cost? And in other words, what is the real electricity consumption today? And related to this, yeah, how far are we from the worst case scenario? So what's the approach to estimating actual consumption? Okay,
so the liberal in me would answer we are always in a market equilibrium, and this is essentially true. But this equilibrium that implies the worst case scenario in terms of energy worst case scenario. So as I see it, and I'm not 100, I thought a lot about this, and I think other people thought a lot, and they don't seem to be very sure. Partly the methods are not entirely clearly described in the related work. So, but as I see it, and I think I'm right, is the following. Let's assume we all have the most efficient hardware there is, right? And then we are at the upper bound, and then some new hardware comes, and some of them will be the early adopters buying that, affording to buy it. And then it's more efficient, and then they go a bit away, they mine, and thus they pull also the average a bit down because they mine more efficiently. But then they can also expand their operations because they can do it, and we are also forced to go after them. And we go down in terms of intensity, so energy per hashes, but the hashes grow, right? And this brings us, so it's always efficiency brings us down, and the rebound effect back up again towards the limit, and we're being banged with the head on that limit. So we are never too far. We are never like one order of magnitude below that limit. We might be a factor of 2. So maybe now we are not at 260, but we are at 150 terawatt hours per year, or at 200 as the Cambridge Energy Index, estimates. So we are relatively, unfortunately, close to that limit because it's worth as an individual, market participant to buy as much as possible of the most efficient.
Thanks. Maybe the last set of questions around renewable energy for sustaining the network. So one question is, do you agree that a conclusion is that there's no possibility for renewable energy to be used in sustaining proof of work because there is just not enough of it available because we would need too much? And then a related question is, since mining location is independent, only price dependent, should one recommendation also include that miners move their operations to where there's a lot of good renewables available?
Okay, so first question, again, not being an energy specialist, it would be a sad world if we couldn't cover 1% of the worldwide electricity consumption through renewables. So there is certainly enough renewables to cover that. But of course, they would be missing somewhere else, right? So our aim is the world energy consumption is primary energy is 160,000 terawatt hours per year, roughly, right? Your latest numbers, I think, 163 or something. Our final aim should be that all those come from not necessarily renewable, but low carbon, so renewable and nuclear. And now maybe 15% of that comes from renewable, or 13 or something. But still, it's a lot. So it's much more, of course, than these 260 terawatts. So we have much more renewable and or low carbon, and we must expand this, aggressively, and we should. But at the same time, of course, the less total energy consumption we have, the easier it is to decarbonize it. So the question is the proof of work wasted or not? What are the benefits again? What is the cost, the environmental cost? What are the societal benefits? And I personally do not see any benefit in the proof of work. I see benefits in the blockchain concept for renewable projects, maybe even inflation hedging and so on, right? So there is, and I'm no specialist to discuss, but there is benefit, obviously. But in the proof of work itself, I don't see. So we should, as quickly as possible, get rid of that. So our overall, as humanity, goal of decarbonizing energy would be easier by those, 200 terawatt hours. And there was a second question, sorry, but I think we are running.
Yeah, I think you've covered it. But yeah, there were questions around. I mean, thanks for touching on that, because there were questions on, what is a useful way to use energy. And I think maybe one last point to highlight is that even though at the global level, this number is, 0.5, 0.6% of electricity, there are much localized impacts as well. So there are local or very localized pushback in some US states, for example. So yeah, there's a global picture and a local picture. And with that, we have a couple minutes left. So I'll turn it back to Pauline. Thank you so much, Vlad. That was super interesting and very, very clear. So thanks. And thanks for everyone for questions.
Thanks for moderating, George, and everyone for taking part and for the questions.
Yes, thanks a lot, George and Vlad. A very interesting discussion, as shown by the number of questions, and a very clear demonstration on how blockchain is a topic for energy efficiency, how much more is needed, but also how many possibilities there are. Our proof of work is not by all means the only option, and many places where we would like to see blockchain in the future do not need to be those highly consuming blockchains. So now it gives us a lot of food for thoughts for coming innovations in blockchain. And I also thanks for Roland for setting the scene, and also for having first recommended this report, which brings us a lot. And I encourage every of your viewers to also have a read at the report, which goes further on some topics and will give you an even more in-depth knowledge of all this. And thanks also a lot to all of my colleagues who helped organize the meeting, Vida, Amy, Etienne, Paola. And I hope to see you soon for other Triden and innovation and digitalization related webinars. Thanks a lot.